Cool. Looks like we should be live. Let's give everybody just a second here to roll in. Okay. So just in case we have a few people showing up a little bit late, we're going to be basically covering a couple of different things this week. Going into shading and lighting 2, building off a lot of the fundamentals and things we talked about in the first shading and lighting class. But with this one, we're kind of expanding on that. The last class was really all about just getting comfortable with Maya. You're doing very simple things like organizing stuff in the outliner, using Maya projects, getting RenderMan working, lighting your scenes for the first time. But for this one, we are going to be getting into materials. And materials are really fun. I think it's something that really almost everyone gets really excited about, because who doesn't like to look at something with amazing colors and textures? So for 1.1, I'm not going to get too deep into this because this was something we did earlier in the week. But for 1.1, really all you guys were doing was just sort of getting comfortable with the idea of pulling from RenderMan's preset browser. You weren't making any of these from scratch. You're using the presets that RenderMan gives you, which is a really good way just to kind of learn the basics. You did some very simple modifications, and so far it's kind of going through the projects that were turned in. I mean, honestly, it feels like everyone did a really good job with this one. Now, for the other activity this week, I'm going to run through a couple things here, actually. One big thing with you guys. So for anyone that's viewing this thing live or watching the recording, what you're going to notice is that the structure of the class has changed since you guys were in the first shading and lighting class. I've reorganized a bunch of things. There's still 3 assignments, but what I want you guys to note is that the first activity has 10%. The second activity, called Live Session, has 0%. And the third activity, called Relating Textures to 3D Surface, is 15%. So 10, 0, 15. Now, the reason I'm kind of pointing this out is because this 0% weighted assignment might be a little confusing to some people. So this is a new way I'm kind of organizing stuff. I want to show you what this looks like. This is the live session activity. This is kind of what we're talking about today, actually. So for 1.2, this is really just an activity where it's all about the live session. It's just a thing for me to promote it. We're going to talk about some different topics that relate to this week's projects. And usually what I do in every live session is I go through some of the things that are required for 1.3. So typically in my assignments, I have a lot of YouTube playlists, and you can still watch through those. I still have all the same YouTube playlists in both assignments. But the reason I kind of like the live session is because sometimes you just want to see the instructor work on the activity, because it helps you get a better idea of what is really expected. You might know the tools because I'm doing them in some of the individual videos, but it's really good just to see okay, what does this all mean? How do I apply it to my project? And that's really what this live session is all about. So we're going to be going through some of the stuff that we're going to use in 1.3. If you guys have questions as we go through it, you can put it in the chat box. I'll be hanging around online a little bit after for anyone that kind of needs a little bit of help with that. But the main idea for this would be, once you're done with the live session, either by viewing it live with me today, or if you end up watching the recording, Friday or over the weekend, just make sure that at the bottom of the activity, you are doing mark as complete. You don't have to turn anything in. You're not submitting anything. It's just all you're really doing is verifying that you have participated in the live session somehow, either today or by watching the recording. That's it. So that's all you have to do. It just helps me keep track of who's watching the video. Now for 1.3, this is the big one that you're turning in over the weekend. This is going to be due Sunday. So this guy, or Sunday night, sorry. This guy, I'll show you what we're basically doing. We are going to be getting into this new project. We're going to be building on this the entire month. This is the first activity where you're going to be using the environment project. We're going to talk about how we assign materials to specific objects, how we keep our materials organized, we're going to go over how to assign materials to multiple objects at the same time. Because sometimes if you have like a really cool wood material that you built, you might want to put that same wood on many pieces. You don't want to keep rebuilding the wood over and over again. And so we're going to assign that to some of the other pieces in here all at once. And I'm going to go through a couple different ways where, let's say you assign something incorrectly, like you put the wrong material on the wrong object. How do you undo it? It's really just more of like a really cool project for us to understand how do we put the right type of material on the right objects. And then, of course, eventually, how do we put textures on our materials? So we're going to find a couple textures online. We'll clean them up a little bit in Photoshop, and then we're going to assign those to the objects. But by the end of the Sunday project, what we should notice is you guys, after you're done with the telescope, you are going to have something that kind of looks like this. Now you're going to have some creative freedom. You're going to be able to find your own wood textures. You can pick your own metals for the telescope. You can find your own wood texture for the different parts of the telescope. And it's going to be kind of like this every week. Every Sunday submission, you're turning in like a new update for this project where you're just adding more and more. Like next week, you'll be doing like the wall and like the balcony railing, and then eventually you're going to be doing like glass and candles and adding more lights. So it's going to be really cool. I always like this activity because I just kind of like seeing what everyone does with it. We've had so many different versions of this project where people have different types of color schemes and different textures on the wall. It's a really cool activity. So it should be pretty fun. But for your submission on Sunday, I got to rename that actually. I totally didn't realize I had that misnamed. It should be 1.3 because this is activity 1.3. But all you're turning in for Sunday is the Maya file for the environment, the render that we're going to produce from the environment, and then the two textures that you're using for the doors and the telescope. So just so I can, if I'm not sure what the texture is in the render, I kind of like seeing them separately so I understand what the image is that you're using. So it's pretty straightforward, but we're going to do a little demo on this stuff, and if you guys have questions, we will tackle that as we go. Now, I do want you to kind of make a note here. Below the documentation in 1.3, I do have some texture resources. These are really good sites if you guys are trying to find textures for something and you're having issues with Google. I have a bunch of videos that still go over how to search for textures on Google, but it's not always the most reliable. These are really good because they're sites that are specifically for texturing 3D models. You're going to get nice tileable textures, very detailed, high resolution. So I would definitely check these out if you find you're having some problem finding the right type of image for your project. All right, I think we can kind of just jump in here and do this, honestly. So the first thing you're going to want to do is download the project. I'll actually do it right here. We're going to download our zip file. Well, here's our image. We can save this. We'll just save that on the desktop, I guess, for now. Okay. And with the zip file, we'll click in here, and I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to right-click on Extract All. Okay, so I've just extracted stuff from the zip file. Let's just get rid of the zip file. So now I just have the folder. And I'm going to move this to my desktop for today. And I know you guys have been doing a pretty good job about keeping your stuff organized. So a lot of you probably have like folders in here per class. Just make sure when you start this activity that you keep it in a very nice, safe location where you can find it pretty easily, and just basically keep everything organized. So if you have like a Shading and Lighting 2 class folder, you could probably drop it in there somewhere. All right. So we're going to get out of this for a second. And that's actually not the right file, so I'm just going to hit New Scene and kind of start from scratch. Now, I got it on my desktop at the moment, and I want you to kind of see what this download looks like. So in this folder, we have another folder. Inside of that, you can see we have all our subfolders. So you guys probably already know exactly what this is. We've done this before. This is a Maya project, right? So remember before in Shading and Lighting 1, I think it was probably for activity... I think 2.1, for you guys, where you made all those like project folders. This is basically the same thing. You're not doing it yourself again. I'm making the folders for you, but this is the same thing that you did before. So we have all our subfolders. In the scenes folder, that's where the Maya file is kind of hanging out. Now, eventually, when we start using textures and loading in other images that we're going to use in the file, we also want to think about where those are going to go. So we have all these folders here, and you know how we've been keeping our Maya files in the scenes folder the whole time? So where do we put images that we use in our project? Like if you guys, let's say you're doing this activity and you found a really awesome wood texture that you want to use for a couple pieces, how do we know where to put that? Because we want to make sure that it's very easy for Maya to find it. So we don't want to have it on like the desktop. I don't want to have it in the downloads folder. We want to keep this in the Maya project. So in this case, what I would recommend you guys do is in the source images folder, I want to start organizing this area for all of my textures. And you guys may remember this folder before because when you were doing, remember when you guys were doing the environment lighting with like the Pixar dome lights, and it had you guys kind of use those different HDR images, like you were trying to match like the day render, the night render, the sunrise, and you were loading in those like images into your light source. So those images were in the source images folder because they're images or textures that we're using in the scene. This is the same thing. Before we did it for lights, this time we're going to do it for materials, but it's all the same idea. We want to keep them in the same area. So if I go back to the activity, I'll show you how I kind of want to organize this for us. There's basically three different types of materials, or actually two different types of materials you're going to be using with textures today. There's going to be the wood texture for the doors and the windows, and there's going to be a wood texture for the telescope. So I'm going to come back here to source images folder, and we're going to make a couple new folders in here. I'm going to right click, do new folder. You can also hit that button right there if you want, new folder. Let's call this, let's call it window underscore textures. Okay, let's hit it again, new folder, telescope underscore textures. Okay, so I've got two folders in here. Now, anything I think that I'm going to use for the telescope, and we can have a couple of textures in here if we wanted to, because we may not know which one we like, so we can kind of use this to test it out. We're going to have a bunch of stuff stored in here for the telescope, and then for the window, we'll be dropping in our textures inside of there. So let's try doing a couple of the easy steps first inside of Maya. So I've got Maya currently open. It's just an empty scene. Let's kind of get used to our kind of muscle memory navigation. So remember, inside of Maya, Alt left click, Alt right mouse, Alt middle mouse, right? All of our simple movements around in 3D. Now we want to set the project immediately. That's the very first thing we do. We're in the software, set the project to the folders before we open the scene file. So how do we do that? Remember, we go to File, come down here to Set Project. Okay, let's find it. Now mine's on my desktop in this case, so I'm going to go back. There's the folder. Now this one's interesting because it actually was like a folder within a folder, so I really want to make sure I'm selecting the project folder, not the other one, because this was like another folder that the project was in. So I want to click on, again, this guy, not the one before it. We're going to hit Set. Okay, it probably worked. If I go to Open, we're going to hit this, and what I want you to notice here that we've kind of seen before is when I do open, look at the path that it's using. See how it's going to my desktop, environment, look dev folder, scenes. So this is showing me that when we set the project, it worked because the open window is immediately defaulting to the right directory because there's the Maya file right there. I didn't have to go digging around looking for it because that's always a really good way to verify you did it right. If your open window changes to the right project directory, then you did everything perfect. That's a really good way just to verify it works. So we're going to select it, hit open. We're going to not save because there's nothing in here. Continue. Okay, give it a second, and we're in. So this is your project. Now, it's very similar to the one you guys had before in the previous class. You'll notice over here that this is looking dark. I do want to show you how to fix this in case you're not sure what this is. This is because we're looking at the back side of the geometry. It's sort of, let me show you an example of what this is, because this is a little confusing. I think it's doing this because of, it's a Maya binary file, because it didn't used to happen when I had Maya ASCII files. So I think the file format's changing it. But let's say we're looking at a cube. If you've ever like put your camera in an object, you may have noticed that it's black on the inside. That's basically what you're seeing right here. This is the inside or back side of this wall. Now there's a reason why it looks like this and why we have it set up like this, because I know if you didn't know what this is and you open the scene up, you'd probably think this is broken, like something's wrong. The way to kind of get this to look right again is in your scene, go to shading, come down to backface culling, and just turn that on. As soon as you turn on backface culling, you'll notice that you can see through to the inside. But see how there's still a wall there? But depending on what angle you're looking at, if you're behind the wall, you can't see it. But if you're looking at it from the front, you can see it. It's just a really cool trick that we can use to like see into an interior, so we don't always have to put our camera inside just to see it. So again, if you don't like that black color effect, just go to shading, turn that on, and you'll be able to see inside the interior. But if you leave it black, it's not a big deal. It's still going to render fine. That's just more of a preference if you want to see inside the building. Now it's kind of similar to the one you guys did before. We have the telescope. It's the same balcony. I added a couple other things we're going to talk about later. This is going to be pretty fun because we're going to get into like glass and different properties for how glass and gemstones work and how they react with light, UVs, different translucent effects. We've got some candles over here. We're going to do some like emissive textures where the candle lights up the scene around it. That's going to be later in the month. So what I want you to notice is that as soon as you get in here, we do have a render camera called Render Cam. And you actually can see it right there. So the camera's already been set up. If you look over here in the channel box, when I select the camera, see how it's all locked? So the camera has been basically locked down to the right position. You don't have to move it. You don't need to create a new camera. This is the one you're going to use for the shot. Now, how do I look through the camera? It's panels, perspective. Remember, that's how we change our camera, right? So if you want to look through the camera, you can see exactly what it's going to look like. And this is where, oh, there it was. I just saw it. That's actually where this guy's coming from. So this camera that we're rendering from is eventually going to generate this image. Now currently it's not going to look like this. So let's check it out right now. Like what does this look like before we do anything? So what I'm going to do is hit this little blue R right here. Now one thing I would recommend, if you already haven't done this from the previous shading and lighting class, is I would highly, highly recommend in the viewport, this button over here from the blue R, 2 to the right, put this to 50% for your viewport render. If you're still at 100%, I would definitely change it. This is going to lower the resolution of your render in the viewport, and it's going to speed things up a lot. You don't need it at 100% for a 4K monitor, 4K resolution monitor. It's way too slow. So we're going to hit R to start the render. You can see it starting. It's going to just take a second, and boom, we're in. This is where we're beginning. So you can see the lights are already set up. The camera's working. All we've got to do is figure out how do we get these textures and materials on the right objects. That's our goal for the first week. Okay? So let's just turn it off for a second. We're going to jump in here and just check out a couple things. I think what I'm going to do is maybe I don't want to do the whole thing for the lecture. How about, you know what, I'm going to let you guys pick. This is a choose your own Fate storybook. Do you guys want me to cover the doors and the like the hinges and bolts, or do you want me to talk about the telescope and like the wood and metal pieces on the telescope? So I can either do one or the other, the doors and the bolts, or I can talk about the telescope and the metal pieces, because we probably only have time for one of them, and I will let you pick. And if nobody picks, I'll pick. But I'll give you guys just a second here. So you guys are in the driver's seat for a moment. Let me get a drink real quick while you guys are stewing about that. So again, I can either do the telescope today or I can do the doors. Doesn't matter to me which one. Door and bolts, love it. All right, Cameron, you got your wish. So we're going to focus on these guys, okay? So let's just get out of this for a second. Actually, let me show you what the first step is. So it says, all right, we want to select all the door, window, shutter, frame, geometry. And you can kind of see it in this little image over here, like all the pieces that are lighting up. Those are the ones you're looking for. Now they are named in the outliner, so if you read through the groups in the outliner, you will kind of figure out what you're looking for. Because I tried to name them appropriately, so it's very easy to find the right ones. Now once we figure out where they are, we're going to go into preset browser. So this part right here is really similar to what you just did earlier in the week for 1.1, the RenderMan preset browser. And we're going to assign this material preset to those objects. Okay, so let's try it out. We're going to back out. Let's minimize. So let's find them first. So for now, I actually don't need to be in the render camera. I'm going to go back to perspective, and we're just going to kind of find all the pieces and just get the material on there. Okay, so let's zoom in here. Now, just to kind of show you how you can find this stuff, I'm just going to click on a door. Like, we know this is one of the pieces. This is definitely a door. And I just want you to look in the outliner so you can find where this is located. Now, see how when I click on different things over here, certain things are lighting up in the outliner? So if I click on the door, the group lights up. If I open the group with the plus, there's door, window, master group. If I click on it, you can see, okay, now this is definitely most of it, but I want you to look at something. Look what's also selecting with this group. It's the hinges, right? And the bolts. It's the metal pieces. I want to be careful because I don't want to put this wood material on these guys. These are metal. So let's open up the door, window, master group and see if we can find something a little bit better. There's our frame. There's some hinges, so I don't want these guys yet, but we're going to come back to these in a second. There's door window group that also has hinges. Okay, there's door window group. Those are more hinges. Now, the reason why this is kind of broken up like this is because a lot of these doors are set up in groups, so eventually later, you guys can open the doors. So for example, let's say later in the month you want to open up the interior so you can like have some really cool lights inside that like cast outside to the balcony. So if I find door window group 1 and hit E, and if you guys want to open the doors up this activity, you are more than welcome to do that. That's totally up to you. It's not required, but you can totally do it if you need to. If you find door window group 1 and use rotate Y, so I'm hitting E for rotation, I'm just going to click on that curve. See how it kind of up, how it's all pivoting on that hinge? So I'm just opening the door. And it's the same thing with the shutter. If you click on the shutter and look on the inside, there's a door shutter group 1. It's the same thing. This will also open up. So maybe I'll leave one of them open just for the sake of the recording today. What you guys could probably do, honestly, is I think as long as you just select the right pieces, you'll probably figure it out. So let's try it out. What I'm going to do is click on the door. I'm going to hold Shift. You click on another piece, it'll deselect the one before. So hold Shift, click. I'm going to hold Shift again. I'm still holding it down, click. Right, so I've got both doors, I've got the frame. Let's click on the shutter. Click on that shutter in the back. Oh, I think my stream might be freaking out. Hold on one second, I gotta refresh my YouTube page. Let me try refreshing it. Yep. I don't know if it's buffering weird for you guys. I have a little screen that's showing me how my stream's doing, and it looked like it was just cutting in and out there for a second. So if it was pausing for you guys, my apologies. I think it's just the internet's a little crappy at the moment. So I've got the frame, 2 shutters, I got the 2 doors selected. I am ready to get this material on there. So all the objects are selected. Now I want to go in the preset browser to find that material that we need. So over here, it's saying, all right, we got them selected. Let's find this guy. Where's Colonial Maple 223? So it's the same thing that we did back in Activity 1.1. So the preset browser is right here. On your RenderMan shelf, it's that guy right there. We're going to open it up. Okay. Now it's when you pop this thing open, it always gives this area way too much space. Let's just kind of crunch this in a little bit and just bring this in so it's not obnoxiously large. Something like that. Okay, now I've got it open. So where is Colonial Maple? Just look through your stuff right here. I mean, you can also go to materials and then simply type it in. I could say Colonial, and it will show up if you just type it in. But if you don't want to type it in through a search on materials, if you just look through the list, you'll notice at the way bottom there's wood. Here's all the wood textures. I have cherry, colonial maple. That's one we need right there. Natural. Some of these already have a texture on it, by the way, like grits oak and the wooden floor. Those have a texture. This is the one we're going to use, though. So to put this material on the objects, when you right-click, so I still have them selected. When you right-click on that material that you want, remember there's going to be two options. Oh, hey, John. Good to see you in this thing, too. Yeah, you can, yeah, I'll have the, by the way, tomorrow morning. But so I have them selected. Now, right here, I have two options on import. I can do import, and I can do import and assign to selected, right? So this one right here is not going to put it on the objects. This will put it on the objects. All this one does is it brings this material in your scene, but it's not going to show up in the render. It's not on anything. Because the important thing you have to remember about this RenderMan preset browser is that all these things you're seeing in here, they're not actually in your Maya file. These are just hanging out in RenderMan's folder on your computer. They're not really in this file. They're not even really in Maya. They're something completely separate. So we have to bring them into your scene in order for them to show up. Now, the reason why I want to do the top one is because if I do import and assign to selected, not only does it save us time by bringing it in, we just don't have to worry about the process of then finding the material, then assigning it ourselves later. No, let's just do it right off the bat. So have it selected, pick that guy in the top by right-clicking, do import and assign, and watch what happens. Boop, we do it, and it looks like nothing happened. Okay, so let's close out. We're going to click. We're going to go here. Now, it might look like this didn't do anything because we didn't see anything change, right? Like, where is the brown wood color? Did it do anything? A good way to verify this works is to try rendering it. And I want to show you something, too. If you know how when you click on an object, if you're like in the channel box, the attribute editor, it'll kind of like update and show you the settings for whatever you're clicking on. So look what happens when I click on like the vase, for example. The vase, you can see I have like a transform node. This is like the vase's transform data. I have the vase's shape data, which is more like information of like how the model is constructed. I have Lambert 2. This is a material. This is a Maya material. This white looks gray right now. And I have default Pixar surface. So this guy right here, this is on everything in your scene. This is the original material. Okay. What we want to do is see if this has a different material on it. So this is default Pixar surface. That is default Pixar surface, right? They're all saying that. But look what happens when I click on the door now. See how it changed? Colonial Maple 223. So if you notice in the attribute editor, if you click on an object and if it shows up in there, you did it. It is on the geometry. Now the reason we're not seeing it is because you have to remember that this viewport is a Maya viewport. You're not going to see a RenderMan effect like a material or a light until you hit that button and you convert it to a RenderMan viewport, or if you guys prefer, you can still use the image tool and render in the separate window. That's totally up to you. I'm going to use the viewport. So let's just hop back to the render cam for a second. And I'm just going to deselect this thing. By the way, if you ever want to deselect something, because you see how when you click around, it keeps selecting another object. If you hold shift and click on the same object you had selected, that will deselect it. Now let's try doing a render. So we're going to hit R, and let's see what it does. And look what we get. Immediately, you can tell it appears like it's working. Now, I'm not saying we're done. Like, it's not necessarily like the right color. We don't have any wood texture on there, but it looks like it's kind of doing what it needs to do. Now, the reason why we're not seeing the wood texture is because if you look at the preset for the material, like if I click on like that door and then go over here to the attribute editor, we're going to talk a lot more about what these different sections are, but the two big ones for you guys this week and next week is going to be the diffuse section at the top and the specular section right below it. So this is called diffuse reflections and specular reflections. They're both reflections. So the diffuse reflections, think of this as like the color of the surface. So like if you guys are looking at your laptop right now, your laptop has a dark gray diffuse color, and there's probably like the trackpad in the middle. That's probably like a lighter gray. Like the little white numbers and letters on your keys. The key is a dark gray, but there's a white diffuse color for the text. So it's basically just the color of the surface. That's all it is. Now, specular reflections are a little bit different. I do want to show you this because I think we had a little bit of confusion with this in the first activity. I'm going to take my perspective camera, and I kind of want to get close to these guys so you can see this up a little bit with more detail. Hopefully this works. Yeah. So I'm really close, but that's okay. I'm going to click on this guy, and I want you to see what happens when I change the specular reflections. I think you guys understand what this is doing. It's like the color brown is what's on the surface, but these are the kind of the confusing part. So face and edge color are controlling how it reflects lights back. So think of this kind of like how shiny or reflective the surface is going to be. So like on your laptop, like I think you guys all have the same one I do, or something very similar. The main surface on the laptop around the keys is kind of like a fairly rubbery sort of matte texture to it. But then like there's a plastic near the top of my laptop by the little Alienware on button that's like a glossier plastic. Do you guys have kind of the same thing where it's like there's two different types of like black materials, like one is rougher and one is shinier? It's probably, like, that's how mine looks, and I think you guys have the same thing on yours. That is defined in this area right here. So I want you to watch the render and what happens when I change some of these settings right here. So if I boost up face color, let me actually turn off selection highlighting. See how when I click on this thing, it's like lighting up. I'm just going to turn off selection highlighting so you don't see that. What this allows me to do is I can click on objects and it doesn't show up as a selection in the render, which is kind of nice. I'm just going to boost up my face color, and I want you to watch what it looks like in the render. So what's happening? Now it's getting brighter, and I think we can all agree it looks a little bit more washed out, but does it also kind of feel like it's a little bit glossier, almost like there's like a lacquer or like a polyurethane? There's something on the surface that's reflecting and making it shine, have more of like a sheen to it, like there's a clear coat on top of the wood. That's because we're boosting up the intensity of that reflection on the surface. It's covering the brown, and we're seeing less and less of that brown underneath of it. Now, if I pull it back down again, let me actually do Control Z. I'm going to back up. So here's default. The other thing that's kind of important about these specular reflections isn't just these two. You don't really have to change these. The big one is this guy. So what is roughness doing? So watch this. If I go low roughness, do you guys see what kind of happened, especially right here? You can see all these little shapes. What is this? What do you think that thing is? You can see it over here on the top. Something really interesting is happening, like right there. What's that? It's a reflection of the environment, right? You're seeing the window framing right here reflecting off the wood behind it. So when you have lower roughness, it is extremely polished and shiny. So if it's down to 0, this thing is basically acting like a polished mirror. It's not really as intense as a mirror because it's not, it's not a perfect reflection, but the clarity of the reflection is near perfect. It's very, very sharp. As you go to a higher roughness, what you're doing is you're basically telling the material that it's a rougher texture. Think of this kind of like polished or smooth and glossy to very gritty and dry. Like the higher roughness would be kind of like something like sandpaper, concrete, dirt, things that are very, very bumpy and porous that don't allow light to reflect back in one angle. That's basically what the slider is. How shiny or rough do you want the surface? Okay, so let's just back up. Let me know if you have any questions about that, by the way. Hopefully that makes sense. We're going to be talking a lot more about this later, but this is just kind of the first time you guys are really like using these properties. So let's just turn that off. We're going to back up here, go to back here. Now, there's one issue that we're kind of running into. So look at this. Let's go to the render cam. Let's turn it on. Because remember, I assigned this material to the door in the door frame. But what is wrong? What about this guy? That doesn't have the material. Now, this kind of brings us to a really interesting little conundrum here, because I want you to kind of think about this. I could do literally the same thing I just did earlier, right? Like, couldn't I just like select those objects, you know, go in the preset browser, find the material, bring it in? I could totally do that. But there's a reason why I'm not going to do that. Because if I put a new material on these guys, it means that I've now created two separate wood materials for the project. That means if you have like let's say I'm critiquing your work and I say, you know what, I like the wood material, but I really wish we had a brighter highlight. Because they're two different materials, that means you're now going to two different areas and changing the same setting on both to get both objects to do what you want. Whereas if we have the same material that we already created here and use the same material that we already made and put it on these guys, it means it's still using one material. So I don't know, hopefully I'm explaining that correctly so it makes sense. But we're trying to have one material do all the wood instead of it being multiple materials for the wood across the entire scene. So it's kind of cool because I want to show you how we do that. So if you want to use another material you've already got, don't go back in the preset browser. The material's already in your scene. So what you want to do instead is go in the Hypershade. That's that button right here at the top. So we're going to click. Okay, Hypershade's going to open up. We're getting some errors down here, but it's Maya. Maya does weird things. We're not going to worry about it. So we're in the Hypershade. Now inside of here, I want you to kind of take a note of what's going on. Look at here at the top with the materials, default Pixar surface, Colonial Maple, Lambert 1, and a couple other ones we don't really talk about, like the particle cloud. But these two are really the important ones. This is that default material that was on everything. That's the gray material on every object right now. This is the one we brought in. So that's the key. How do I get this on those guys? So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back. Come on. Go to perspective. We're going to hop over here. Let's click on our objects that we want, just like before. Select. Oh, let me turn on selection highlighting so I can see it again. I'm going to hold shift, click on that, clicking on the two shutters behind it. Okay, so I think I've got pretty much everything. Oh, looks good. Yeah, we got all the... if you wanted to, you could do the little shelf in here. You're not going to see that anyway, but feel free to do that. Okay, so we've got all the wood selected. Now, what you want to do, since we're using the material that we already built, is go in your Hypershade. Now, this is kind of the tricky part. You're going to right-click over the material. Now, be careful about this, because if you accidentally left-click anywhere, watch what happens to my selection. See how I lose my selection? Let me do it again. With your selection active, right mouse button. Hold it down over the material. Now notice when I do this, a bunch of options pop up. What do I want to do with the material? Do I want to assign it to selection? Do I want to select the objects that are using the material? Am I trying to graph the material network? I want to do the one on the top. I want to assign this material to what I'm selecting. So that's going to put it on these guys. So I'm going to go up, release my right mouse button, boom. And it's done. You can see a little thing at the bottom that says result, Colonial Maple 223 shading group. And let's just verify it worked. How do we do that? Remember, if you click on the objects and look in the attribute editor, see how it's popping up? So the really cool thing now is that we were able to get the same material on multiple pieces. And if you really find it's pretty easy to do this, you could totally go over here to these windows, do the same thing again, and repeat it for all the windows. Now, obviously, we're not going to see these in the render, but if you want to do it anyway, go for it. Okay, so let's try a test render. We're going to go back here to render cam. Let's hit R. Let's just see if it works. There we go. I'm going to hold shift just to deselect it. But even though I don't have the wood texture on here, because I haven't gone online to get one yet, you can see that like it looks like that brown material is on exactly what it should be. It feels like it matches what I'm seeing in the image. I just need to find a texture to give it that wood look, so it's not just like flat brown. Okay, so hopefully that's good so far. Let's turn the render off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the texture in a second. I'm actually going to skip ahead for a minute because while we're kind of talking about material signing, I do want to really quickly do the bolts just to show you this part. This part's pretty interesting. All right, so let's jump to the bolts real quick. Now you know how before I was basically in here just like clicking on stuff and holding shift and selecting things. So watch this. All right, I want to do the bolts. Look at how many pieces make up the bolts in the hinges. And this is for one of them, right? All that. There's one there. There's latches in here. There's hinges there, back there, up here. They're on the inside as well. They're over here. There's a little hook. There's a latch for the inside shutter that can be open and closed, and so it keeps it locked together. There's a lot of metal pieces. I don't want to see you guys. I mean, you can totally, if you are trying to punish yourselves and you really love manually clicking through every object, you can have a blast and do this. But I want to show you a really cool thing that can be set up sometimes in Maya to make this so much faster. Remember back in the first month where you guys were doing display layers and we were talking about how we can use these layers over here to like hide and and control the visibility of objects. So in the first shading and lighting class, for anyone that hasn't taken that class yet, that's in here. In the first shading and lighting class, we use display layers to make backgrounds behind objects. So like for the character project, we would like set up like a little polyplane background, and we were using this to basically turn the background on and off depending on which camera we were going to use. Now you'll notice that I already have display layers set up, and I have one which is turned off called window glass layer. So eventually when we do the glass later in the month, we're going to be using this to make the glass visible so I can then assign the material to it and it'll look like there's glass on the door. But the other cool thing about display layers is not just for visibility. I love using display layers for organization. So what I did is I made a display layer where I already took the time to find all the hinges, bolts, all the pieces, and I put them on their own layer. So you can see if I turn this off, see how it's automatically turning off all the hinges and bolts. And that's over here too, by the way. You can't really see them. Where are they? Oh, there they are. Yeah, I have it turned off. So they are right there, right? All the hinges and bolts are on this thing. Now, the reason why this is important is because once you set this up once and you take the time to build a display layer with a lot of pieces on it, look what happens if I right-click. If I right-click on the layer, there's a thing in here that says Select Objects. If I select that layer's objects, look what happens. It automatically selected every single piece that I put on the display layer. And I know this, maybe it's not that impressive to you. It's impressive to me because I for a few years when I first started using Maya, I had no clue how any of this stuff worked. Like when they first came out with this, I didn't realize you could do this. And once I understood that, like, oh crap, like I actually can use display layers to like select things quicker, that completely changed my workflow. Because what I started doing is when I started getting into like more complicated projects, I started building my assets in display layers. So anytime I had to like go back and reference something or select multiple pieces over and over again, I would always do it through here, select the objects, get my selection very quickly, instead of it taking 30 minutes of me clicking through the scene hoping I select every single piece. So you guys don't have to do the setup work. I did it for you, but I want you to kind of see that, just so in the future, once you guys start modeling your own props and like environments, remember this, because you can use display layers to keep the entire scene organized. It's extremely powerful. I cannot stress that enough. So I've got them selected. What we're going to do is really quickly put that material on there. So in here, we got all the hinge and bolt geometry selected. We just did the tip. We're using the display layer. Amazing. We're going to find the preset browser, and in this case, we want to use black oxidized steel. Okay, so let's find that real quick. So let's go back. So we got the preset browser already open down here. If you ever close out of this, you can still hit the button and pop it back open. It's very easy. All right, let's just bring this in. The only thing about this thing, I think it's the 4K display. This preset browser is always way too big. Okay, so black oxidized steel. That is probably going to be under plain metal. Yeah, it's right there, actually, black oxidized steel. So we're going to right-click. I have it selected. Remember, I do import and assign to selected. So it's going to assign it to all those things that we just selected earlier. Click. Okay, let's just do our little spot check. How do we verify it works? Remember, if the attribute editor is open, click through your objects. You should see that tab where it shows you the material. And if you click on a bolt or a hinge or any of those pieces, it should show you it's using this guy. This is what this preset looks like. It's a very simple, it kind of has like a greenish tint to it, but it's a very simple, it's kind of dark, desaturated, kind of green-gray. It's probably a little color here in the face color. But it's not too bright. So we're going to come back here. We'll do a render. This one's kind of subtle, so you don't really notice it that much. Might be kind of hard to see. You totally can't see any of this. You kind of can right there on the window. Yeah, it's working. So it's there. If you're not sure if it's working, remember you can always take your perspective camera, move that really close, and render with perspective camera, and get and you can tell if it's doing what you need to do. All right, so we got that set up. Now let's hop back. Now I'm not going to do the telescope, obviously. I'm going to let you guys kind of figure that out. But we are going to hop back in here to the step before, because there is one big thing we kind of just glossed over that we need to go back to. Okay, so we didn't do this stuff right here, step 3 and 4 of this second part here. So I need to find a high resolution wood texture that we could use for the wood material that we used from the preset browser. We might need to clean up in Photoshop. If we find a good one, we probably don't need to. I'm going to probably avoid that today just because I have a bunch of videos that talk about how to clean it up in Photoshop, and we're already going to be in Photoshop in next week's live session, so I'm going to skip the cleanup stuff. I'm just going to try to find a really good texture, hope it works, and we're going to save it, put it in the right folder, and we're just going to see what it looks like on the surface. Okay. So this is where we go back to our LMS. We're going to come down here, and you can see under the documentation, I have texture resources, and here's those sites I was talking about. Let's try a couple out. And again, you guys can grab multiple images because you don't really know which one you're going to like until you see it in the render. So we might grab a couple and just test it out. So let's do pixels. Let's do Texturify. We'll just see what we can find on these two. I use Pexels all the time. Actually, when you guys start diving through Pexels, you're totally going to see a ton of images I use in my documentation. Like I think if I do lava, or wait, texture maybe? I use some of these as my background images in some of my my slides for the documentation. Yeah, so if I do texture, you can see we're getting some interesting stuff like stones and marbles. We're going to come back to these next week because we're going to use these for different pieces in the scene. Now this one's kind of cool. Now this is kind of brings up a good point here. One thing that's really important about finding the right texture is you have to kind of remember what you're trying to do with the texture. Like, what is it simulating? There's a big problem with this type of image right here. If I just download this and connect it to the wood frame and all that stuff, this is an image of wooden boards or planks, and see how they already have the space between them, right? They look like individual boards. If you put this on any of these pieces, you are going to see the individual board lines showing up on the model. So what that it's going to do is going to make it look like the wood frame is made up of these weird sliced like mini boards that are cutting through it everywhere. That's not really what this should be doing. I want to find one wood texture that's fairly consistent, that doesn't have any of this. And hopefully I can find one that doesn't have that much lighting or shadow information, because we're going to be generating the lighting and shadows in Maya. That's why we're rendering it. I don't want the light and shadows in the texture. So we want something relatively flat. So let's try this out again. Let's do wood texture. Okay, so we're in wood texture. Now this one we actually are getting some better results. I like this one. This one's really good. Again, these ones with the boards I'm not too crazy about. That one's probably too close up because you're getting like massive knots. So I probably wouldn't do that one. This one's not too bad. Yeah, a lot of these I probably honestly can't use because they're just not the right type of wood. But I'm going to save one from here, and then we're going to try the other side out. I still see a couple. Oh, I use that in one of my slides. I do see a couple that we can probably... Let's go back up to the top. All right, we're going to grab... Let's get this guy right here. This one's not bad. So we're going to click, come up here, free download. This is a 2832 by 2832. It's a pretty good size image. That's going to be totally fine. Download. Donate. If you guys want to donate, you're more than welcome to, but we're not going to worry about that for right now. Okay, so I've got that downloaded. And let's go to texture file. Let's just do the same thing. It's a different site, so we have completely different textures. We're going to do wood texture. Oh, please. Let's try wood. There we go. Okay. We're not going to put in texture. This is a texture site. It knows their textures. So I think by me putting that word in there, it was kind of throwing it off. Okay, this one's kind of an interesting one because you can tell a lot of these are just photos of like wooden doors. Some of these you could maybe use if you brought it into Photoshop and cleaned up a lot of the stuff outside of it. Like if you removed all the junk around it, some of these may be usable. Yeah, boards. I don't want to use any of that. I'll see if I can find... These are really cool wooden textures, though. I want to see if I can find something that's a bit more neutral, which honestly might not happen with this site. So we're not going to spend too much time doing this. There's a lot of really good images on here, though. So if you ever need like reference, like this site's fantastic for that. All right, let's not do Texturify. Let's do free stock textures instead. Let's do wood texture. Oh, this one has a bunch. Holy crap. Yep, this is a good one here. So yeah, wood grain plank. These are pretty big. Building quite a bit, but I think we can get those to work. Yeah, bolt more planks. Yeah, any of those will probably work. And let's bring up the last one, Texturized. And we can even use Google, honestly. That we're going to find stuff on Google too. Here's Texturize. There's a wood category in this one. Not planks, but I think fine might be okay. That one's decent. I like that one too. We've had a few people use this guy. Yeah, this one has some pretty good ones actually. I think what I'm going to do is let's use this one. So this one's a vertical image. It's taller. That's kind of interesting. You know what? We're going to get kind of crazy here. I'm going to go to Google. I'll show you a way to do this. Let's do wood texture in Google. Okay. So I'm going to go to images at the top. Here's a bunch of wood. You can see we're getting a bunch of really good stuff here as well. One thing I want you to do, if you're going to use Google, a little tip on the top right where it says tools, hit that. Go to size, pick large. What this is going to do is it's going to filter out all the textures that are really small that you really wouldn't want to use those anyway because they're not going to look very good. And hopefully what we're only seeing now are much higher resolution textures. And a lot of these, again, look decent. Some of these are actually probably the same ones that we were seeing on the other sites anyway. All right, let's just grab one at the top. We're not going to spend too much more time doing this. We'll do this guy. Oh, there's a watermark. That's not good. Of course. Cool. Good enough. We'll do that. So I'm going to right-click. This one, I don't know if I'm going to find the wood texture. Oh, cool. It's another site I actually don't have bookmarked. That's decent. That one's not very good, but we're going to right click. Let's just save it. Now I'm going to put these in the source images folder. So let's go to the folder, down here to source images. Here's our window textures, right? And I'm going to at least name these so I know what they are. We'll say this is window texture 1. Okay, here's the other one, which I actually already downloaded that. So that one is hanging out in my downloads folder. Let me just get that real quick. That one's in downloads. There it is. Let's call this, so let's just drag it in here first. Put that in window. Okay, this will be window texture 2. Awesome. So we got a couple choices we're going to look through. I think I'm going to use this one, honestly, but we'll test them out. All right. So I've got them in there. What do we do? So because we only have one material on all the objects, it's actually going to be really easy because we only have to do this once. So as long as we get it connected properly, it's going to work. So how do we know how to connect it? Well, if you kind of think about what's going on right now, currently, see how the color for this looks like it is the wood texture? And if you look at our render, what's currently happening is our wood preset is really just using a solid brown color. Like there's no actual texture in here. It's literally just a flat color. So this color, though, this is the thing that should be using the texture. So this is the right attribute. I just need to replace this brown with that image that we saved from Google, from our different sites. So let's turn this off for a second. I'm also going to save this, by the way, because we don't want to lose anything. So let's do File, Save As, and I'm going to call this, we'll call this Part 1, since it's our first week. So there's going to be 2 ways you can connect a texture. I'm going to show you both ways for the recording. Probably the way you guys are going to do it is if you click on your material or your object, go to your material. See how this, to the right of that color slider, there's a little checker box. I want you to hit that button right there. We're going to hit it, and you're going to see as soon as I do that, a new thing pops up. This is a new window you guys have probably not seen before. This is the Create Render Node window. So this is a window that is basically trying to figure out what are you trying to put in color. So when you hit this input button, you have to tell Maya, what are you trying to connect into color? Because clearly you don't want this. What do you want? Now there's a lot of different things you can connect in here. Maya comes with like 2D textures and gradients and random like checker patterns and noise patterns. There's 3-dimensional textures down under here with like RenderMan. They have their own series of textures and stuff you can connect, and utility nodes. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're keeping it very, very simple. What we're doing is simply connecting a file. So because we saved a file from our browser. So under 2D textures, you're going to hit File. Now I want you to go back to the material and look at what changed. See how that's no longer brown? Look, I can't even click on it. I can't move the slider. This is not an option anymore. So it's not black either, by the way. It's nothing. This is not a color. But notice what's happened to that button. Before it was a checker. Now look what happened. It's a little square with this tiny little arrow poking into it. This icon is, anytime you see this little icon that looks like this is a input icon. It's telling you that something is input into this attribute. It's no longer a slider like the other guys. Now, if you hit the button, watch what happens. Look what it did. It took me to the file node. It's taken me to the spot that I want to load in the texture. So then what I can do is simply click that folder, because it's going to go right here. We're going to hit the folder. Okay, because we set our project. See how it's already in the source images folder? So again, this is more proof that when you set your project, everything in Maya should know how to find something. So source images, window texture, and let's do this bottom one here. I like texture 2 more personally. We're going to hit open. Okay, it's on there. Now we're not seeing it because I want to render it. So let's hit R and let's just see what happens. It's going to look a little weird for a second. Look at the door. See how that does not look good? It's like a weird giant blue R. Just give it a minute. Wait and watch the bottom right here. You're going to see it changes in a second. any moment it should do it. There, it just popped. Okay. When you guys do your render, don't panic when you see the blue R. A lot of people freak out and they're like, oh no, I didn't do something right. It was like it broke. It didn't break. What it's doing is if you go back to the folder, I want you to see what happened. See how this is the image here? Look what's appeared in the folder. This was not here a second ago. Look at the name. Window texture2.jpg. It's this guy, but there's something at the end that says .text. So the reason why it didn't load in initially is because when you're using textures with RenderMan, RenderMan wants to use a .text file format. That's not a very popular format, and you don't typically find those online. It's better for memory, though. There's a reason why it wants to use those. So what RenderMan does kind of behind the scenes on the back end is as long as you find the right texture you want, when you hit render, if it doesn't have the .text version of your file, because we didn't have that, for the first couple seconds when you render it for the first time, RenderMan is converting your image to that .text format that it's looking for. Once it makes that text file, and this is here, you'll never have to worry about it again. It'll immediately work every time you hit render. It just looks a little bit weird the first time because this doesn't exist. But once it shows up and clicks over, you're good to go. And you can see it actually worked. We're getting some pretty cool variation to this thing already. So there's our texture. Not too bad. Now the wood grain is pretty big for the doors. It's not maybe the best idea for that. So I could try to find another image that has like with the cameras pulled back and I get more variation to the wood grain, but it's fine for what we're doing. Now as far as like modifying the texture, it's kind of light. So if you kind of like going for that more of like a lighter appearance for it, where it doesn't have like a varnish, you could totally leave it the way it is. If you want to make a darker wood, what you could do is if you click on the door, there's a diffuse gain setting right above the color. This is your intensity for the texture. Let me do a crop. So I'm going to click crop and just draw over that part of the frame. Let's just turn it off for a second so you can see it. If I bring diffuse gain down, just watch what happens to the color. It's getting darker as I lower it. So you kind of use this as a way to control how bright you want that texture to be when it reacts with the light. So I might bring it down a little bit, and maybe we think this looks pretty good. Okay, so there we go. The wood texture's on there. That's really all I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a masterpiece. I just want to see what texture you can find. I'd used a different one for mine when I did it, but what does it look like on the door? Play around with the intensity, balance it properly. If you want, you can go in here and play around with the specular reflections. I don't think you're going to have to do it, but you can kind of experiment if you want to. I would just be really careful because it's very easy to crank this up and you start turning your wood into like a extremely reflective, polished looking mirror. So just be very careful about pushing these guys too far. But that's it. It's kind of on there. And we've already got those done. So really the only thing we didn't do is we didn't go into the telescope. We didn't do any of that stuff. Oops, not the video. We didn't do the telescope, but it's basically the same thing. There's a bunch of wood pieces. Put your material. This one's Ipswich Pine 221. Put it on all the pieces. Find another wood texture. Assign it. Get all the metal pieces on the telescope. You get to choose whatever metal you want for this one. Find whatever metal you want to use. Gold, brass, nickel, whatever you're feeling. It kind of depends on what color palette you want to use for the shot. You can assign the metal to that. You can break it up between different metals if you want. I'll let you kind of decide what you want to do with that one. Sorry, I know I'm going over time a little bit. I do want to show you one other thing real quick that's kind of important. I wanted to show you guys what this stuff looks like in the Hypershade because you do want to graph networks occasionally. So the whole time we were working on stuff, you may notice that in the Hypershade down here, a bunch of things have kind of slowly appeared. Like there's my black oxidized steel for the hinges. There's a file node. This is the file node actually that we loaded in the wood texture. I'm going to clear a graph real quick So that's this little twinkling star looking icon. It's not going to delete anything. It's just removing these from the node graph so you don't see it. Sometimes when you're working on a material, like you know how over here I hit that little input button and I was showing you guys how it kind of takes me to the file node so I can load in an image. There are going to be a lot of times where you don't want to navigate to your files doing this every time. It's a kind of a slow process to like click around through every attribute to find the file. Um, you can graph the material network and see all that stuff down here. So for the Colonial Maple one, for example, you see how you know how it's like hanging out right here? If I hold my right mouse button down on it, if I choose the one at the bottom called Graph Network, which I actually kind of showed you guys this earlier when you were talking about assign material to selection. If I use Graph Network, watch what happens down here below. See how it's graphing what's called a material network? This is that thing right there. That's actually your material. I know we've been getting into it kind of a weird way by clicking on the object and doing it this way, but this is actually this is how you get to it in the Hypershade. That's your material. That's the texture, and you can actually see how they're connected. The texture's color is going into the material's diffuse color. So notice how it says diffuse color, diffuse color. All these things you're seeing right here, these are all the attributes on the material. Now, I'm going to show you something that's going to make you freak out for a second. If you start digging through the material, notice how there's like lots of different settings that we haven't talked about yet. If you want to have a mild heart attack, you can actually see the settings and attributes in the Hypershade. If you click on the material with it selected, and I'm going to use my 1, 2, 3, 4 keys, watch what this thing does. Let me back up so you can get the full effect. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now 4 is the default. 3 will show you every single attribute on the material. Let's take a journey. Let's back up here. We're almost at the bottom. There's a lot of stuff on this material. Look at all those guys. It's ridiculous. That is what's on the material. We connected into one of them. There's about another 100 that we haven't talked about. And we're doing the easy one, diffuse color, but there are a ton of other ones that you could potentially connect things into. So don't panic. But that is what is on the material. There's a lot of stuff there. So 3, by the way, will show you all the inputs and output connections, all the attributes. 1 is hiding everything. It's collapsing it down. I like using 1 quite a bit to collapse nodes I don't really want to edit. 2 will only show you what's connected. So see when I hit 2, it only shows me diffuse color and out color because those are the only ones that have connections. 3 is everything. 4 is just like the default setup right there. But I thought it was kind of important because I do want you guys to kind of get used to the idea of thinking of a material and the file as a network, very, very similar to Nuke. So just like you're doing node editing in Nuke, it's the same idea in the Hypershade. So again, clear graph, hold down right mouse button, graph network. If I do it on black oxidized steel, I could do it too. Hold down right mouse button, graph network. And I can see this doesn't have a texture, but you still get the same idea. There's the material. If we wanted to, we could put a texture in it. It would show up over here. So the only thing, aside from the telescope, is we'd produce the final render. I'm going to let you guys check the video for that. I talked about how we produce the final image. I think it's like the last one in the playlist. Not that one. Where is it? Wait a minute. Make sure it's in here. Oh, it must be this final one right here. Yeah, I probably do it on the last one. I'll have to double check the video, but I think in this guy, I have a bunch of other ones that talk about the Photoshop stuff. You can check that out. In here, yeah, near the end, I talk about how to clean up the image for the final. That way it looks clean. So you're just modifying a couple things in the render settings. So it's a bunch of cool stuff. But at the end of the day, you're just turning in your Maya file, the image, whatever wood textures you used, and then I'll check that out. But that's it. Hopefully this was pretty informative for you guys. It's a pretty cool little project, though. So have fun. If you have any questions about it, let me know. And again, what I'm going to do is send out the recording for this thing tomorrow morning. As soon as you guys have watched it, or if you're in here live with me today, make sure you go back to activity 1.2 and then just do me a favor and do mark as complete so I know that you have seen this information. And then you can move on to activity 1.3. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. And I will either talk to you guys tomorrow over the weekend, or maybe I will see you at the next live session.